Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 8th annual UAGC Early Childhood Conference. I'm super excited about this session. It is Understanding Reinforcers in the Early Childhood Classroom. Kayla Butler, our very own associate faculty, is here to present with us. She is actually an early childhood consultant and trainer, and we are super excited. Kayla, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Okay.
All right, yes. On this screen, we kindly request your attention for a brief moment in the spirit of transparency and utmost respect for our community. We have some information we'd like you to read on this disclaimer screen, and by taking a few moments to read through this disclaimer, you will empower yourself with important information regarding the boundaries of our knowledge sharing environment. All right, on this next screen, you are also going to see another disclaimer, and then together we're going to embark on some exciting topics in early childhood education. All right, it is my pleasure and my honor to introduce Kayla. She graduated from UAGC with a bachelor's in early childhood development with differentiated instruction with the early intervention specialization and a master's in psychology with an interest in developmental psychology. Lots of stuff. She is certified by the state of Arizona as an early childhood specialist, professional development trainer and provider, and technical assistant provider. Kayla holds an Arizona K-12 Family Sciences Teaching Certificate, and she is certified cognitive coach for children with autism. She has so much great experience. I love when she comes and presents. She has experience in ECA as a teacher, administrator, and early interventionist. Currently, Kayla is an EC instructor here at UAGC and a freelance early childhood consultant. She also has special needs child whom she homeschools and provides rehabilitation services. And Kayla, I know you do amazing at that. I know you're doing amazing with your students. We thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Okay. So, before I get into reinforcement specifically, I want to talk about something else. I'm not going to go too deep into it because it is a lot of information, but it's important to start, I think, with Thorndike's stimulus response theory, as it's one of the foundations of the idea of reinforcement. Now, the stimulus response theory, it states that learning essentially comes down to two things, stimulus and response. Now, learning as a concept does not always mean academics, ABCs, one, two, threes, right? Learning is learning. So whether that's learning the ABCs or developing behavior or social learning, it all comes down to stimulus and response, according to Thorndike. So the image on the left here on the screen, it illustrates stimuli that we receive through our five senses, such as taste or smell. A stimulus is just an event or a change in one's environment. In the image on the right, it illustrates the response to that stimulus. And so, excuse me, um, its common responses by means of emotions such as sadness or anger or fear. And so it's that response is a direct reaction to the stimulus. And so a very simple example would be you're walking down a quiet road and suddenly a dog comes up running at you, barking loudly. You get scared, your heart races, you don't know this dog, you don't know who he belongs to, right? Maybe you scream. In this case, the barking is the stimulus. You're hearing the barking, it's coming up at you in your face. And so the fear that you feel, that's the response. And so the learning that may occur from that is that dogs are scary animals. Now, not all dogs are scary animals, but that's what you learned from that experience. And so every time you see a dog after that experience, you feel fear without even interacting with it, without hearing the barking. If you hear barking in the distance, you feel fear because of that experience. That is a learned response. So that's what the stimulus response theory talks about. And so now there's three laws of learning proposed by Thorndike that I want to mention. The first is the law of effect. That is the one at the top of our diagram here in red. Now, this is a pretty basic law that simply states that if a response to stimuli produces a satisfying effect, they're likely to be repeated. And if it produces an unsatisfying effect, they're likely to be avoided. Back to our example of the dog, the barking, and the fear. In the classroom, this looks like a 3-year-old boy gives a girl a friendly hug in the morning when she arrives into class. And so the girl then chooses to play with him when she sees him that day. Anytime that she sees him around the classroom, she chooses him to play with. So the boy will probably choose to hug her again the next morning. Or a toddler chooses a Jack-in-the-Box type toy during free play, and it pops open really loudly. The boy screams in fear, and his heartbeat beats really fast. That child probably will not choose that toy again. So this is the law of effect. The second is the law of readiness. That's the one in yellow down on the left in our diagram. This is another pretty basic law that states that the stimulus and response relationship is strengthened or weakened based on the subject's readiness to learn. And so, is the child hungry? Are they tired? Are they stressed? Are they sick? Is the child agitated or in a heightened state of dysregulation following a redirection or a fight with another child? Does the child have unmet sensory needs? Are they ready to learn? So that's the law of readiness. And the law of exercise on the right in the green on our diagram, that's the third law. And this states that the more frequently a stimulus and response are associated with each other, the more likely the particular response will follow the stimulus. And that's a lot of words to basically say that, let's say a child is watching a movie about snakes. And in all of the movies, the characters are afraid of snakes, and the snakes hurt the characters. And so because of this, child has seen multiple examples of this association of fear with snakes from different people, then the first time that child encounters a snake in real life, they'll most likely be afraid of it because that's what they've seen consistently. And Thorndike did later say that this does not always apply to every situation, but it is a good baseline law. So these are Thorndike's 3 laws. And one other thing I wanted to say about the snakes. If only half of the movies that he watched showed snakes hurting the characters, and half of the movies showed people holding and petting snakes and wrapping around them and no fear, then the outcome of that in-person encounter with the child and the snake would be less likely to predict. It'd be a little more like, well, how's this child going to react because of that, how he's seen the different reactions and mixed associations. So back to our laws. If the child is satisfied up top and ready down on the left, while this combination is effective in that kind of that yellow, red, purplish color on the left side, it is effective, but it often lacks discipline. If the child is ready and practiced, yellow and green down on the bottom, in that middle, yellow, green, if they're ready and they're practiced, the behavior is most likely permanent but unenjoyable. And if the child is practiced and satisfied, our last 2, while enjoyable, this behavior is mostly only preferred, and it's easy to reinforce. So the idea is this: when only 2 of these laws are occurring in the environment at the same time, there's learning happening, but it's not ideal or comprehensive. And so comprehensive or holistic learning, this happens when the child is satisfied, ready, and well practiced, all 3 of them happening at the same time. So with that in mind, how does reinforcement come into play with combining these laws like this? I believe reinforcement happens right where this arrow is pointing in that red-green area, the law of effect and the law of exercise, satisfied and practiced. It's a means to both satisfy and practice the child. And so basically ensuring the child is ready to learn really is the responsibility of the teacher and the caregiver. Because remember, without all 3, even with effective reinforcement, the behavior still becomes a rewarded habit rather than comprehensive learning. Reinforcement in itself is not comprehensive learning. It just helps to meet those two laws, the law of effect and law of exercise. So what exactly is a reinforcer? It is, I call it the jack of all trades, because it does so many things. It can be used in so many ways, in so many environments. A reinforcer, it really just refers to a stimulus, an event, or a consequence that follows a particular behavior and increases the likelihood that that behavior will be repeated in the future. So these are behaviors that we want to happen, we reinforce them. So it's used in behavioral psychology, it's used in applied behavior analysis, ABA, it's used in operant conditioning, it's used in the workplace, in law enforcement, home settings, school settings, across all ages and demographics. It's even used with animals. So the different forms of reinforcement, let's talk about operant conditioning just a little bit here. The idea behind operant conditioning is that the results of your past behaviors have conditioned you to either repeat or avoid those behaviors. So in my little diagram here, in the top row, you have the two different kinds of reinforcement. And in the bottom row, you have the two different kinds of punishment. In the left column, you have positive, and in the right column, you have negative. So it's kind of this little diagram, this little chart that you use to figure out where you are. So to increase the behavior, you see on the left side, increase the behavior, you reinforce. And to decrease the behavior, you punish. And if you add stimuli, which you see on the top, if you add stimuli, it's considered positive, and removing stimuli is considered negative. So it's essentially a formula, right? If you want to increase the behavior and you add a stimulus to the environment, it's a positive reinforcement. If you want to decrease a behavior and you remove a stimulus, it is a negative punishment. This chart is used to illustrate this idea of operant conditioning, with the variables being stimuli and behavior. In order to encourage a behavior to repeat, you reinforce. And to encourage a behavior to decrease, you punish. And we're going to talk about that word in a second. Whether you add or remove stimuli is dependent on the child, the environment, and the situation. Depending on what combination you use, that determines the consequence of your behavior. Excuse me. All right, so I want to talk for a second about misconceptions about what I just explained. There's a couple misconceptions that happen here. First is the word punishment. Punishment does not mean discipline. So unless you're a BCBA or you work in behavioral psychology, chances are you hear the word punishment and you immediately think discipline, such as spanking or isolation or yelling, right? This is a learned association from the basic conversational use of the word. In operant conditioning, punishment does not mean discipline. It does not equate to spanking or timeout. Punishment simply means an attempt to decrease a target behavior. It's the opposite of reinforcement. So the other misconception that I want to talk about with this is with reinforcement, and that is bribery. And so oftentimes people will hear the word reinforcement, or they'll learn about the concept of reinforcement and they'll be like, well, that's bribing. Reinforcement is different from bribery. So these are very different concepts in behavioral psychology. Simply put, bribery rewards to make a behavior happen, while reinforcement rewards when a behavior is already happening. Bribery tries to get the behavior to happen. Reinforcement keeps the behavior happening. It's a very, very different concept. Bribery is, I will give you a piece of candy if you go sit in your chair. Reinforcement is, great work sitting so nicely in your chair, here's a candy. Can you hear the difference? So they serve different purposes, they have different direct consequences. Consequence also has an inaccurate misconception as well. Consequence is just the direct result of an event or behavior, but it's often thought of with a negative connotation similar to punishment. However, it can be a neutral result or a good result as well. So let's go back to our chart now that we've addressed those misconceptions a little bit. For this presentation, we're only going to focus on increasing the behaviors. This means we introduce or remove a stimulus in order to have a behavior keep occurring rather than stop occurring, which was punishment. And so this can either be done by adding to the environment or removing from the environment, adding a stimulus or removing a stimulus. And so either action incurs a response, as stated in the stimulus response theory. Remember, we talked about that. In turn, it continues the target behavior. So research has repeatedly shown that focusing on the desired behaviors of a child rather than the undesired behaviors is far more effective in early childhood classroom management. This is why we're focusing on reinforcement today instead of punishment. Now, everyone is different, of course. You could find both of these to be really easy for you or both to be really difficult. In my personal experience, I have found positive reinforcement to be much more natural than negative reinforcement. Remember, positive is adding, negative is taking away. I really have to think about ways to remove something from the environment in order to have a behavior continue. That's just, it's harder for me. It might be easy for you. For me, negative reinforcement is something that I have to constantly be practicing, researching, making sure it's in the front of my mind. Sometimes this is a professional practice that you have to do to make sure that you have consistent ability in your professional skills and expertise. You don't want to lean too heavy on one strategy just because it's effortless for you, and neglect strategies that are actually appropriate in that moment because it takes more effort. So let's talk about a few common examples of each type of reinforcement. Some common elements to add to an early childhood environment includes stickers, stamps, treats, or other types of tokens, praise, grades, depending on what age you work with, or progress reports, depending on what kind of learning environment you work in, awards, certificates, high fives, hugs, preferred items such as certain toys. You can see how this would just be really easy and really natural to do, right? So while positive reinforcement often depends on the individual's needs, negative reinforcement often depends on the environment itself. Some common examples of this could be removal of undesired, of loud sounds, of sensory stimulation that's just agitating the child. Noise reducing headphones would be a great example of this. Removal of undesired consequences. The child does not have to do an unpreferred activity with the group because they were making a good choice, for example. Let's say they hate coloring. They were doing everything right all morning, following all directions, and normally they struggle with this. So you would tell them, okay, you can read a book at the table instead of coloring like everyone else. So they're still sitting at the table with the group. They're just not doing the activity that they don't want to do because they've been doing everything the way they should be all morning. So that's just an example of removing something from the environment in order to increase the behavior. Another example would be a limited environmental hostility. So let's say you normally have issues controlling your tone. You sometimes yell out of frustration. Now, this is something you're working on. You make it an effort to regulate your own emotions in the moment to ensure the children continues a good work. Another thing would be breaks from work or instruction. I call these brain breaks. These are motivators to continue being productive and make good choices. Sometimes they're obvious reinforcement tactics, and sometimes they take some creativity, right? You can't always just remove an element of the environment. It isn't always a plausible solution. So as a side note, these strategies are often where work and school accommodations come in. The child's 504 could include standing while working instead of sitting in a chair. Their IFSP could incorporate a behavior plan that requires a token economy system. Their occupational therapist outside of school could request that they receive an alternative task during the class. Those are just some examples of how reinforcers could come in the form of documentation or therapy or at the request of a multidisciplinary team. Some common reinforcers This is not an exclusive list, okay, by any means. These are reinforcers and interventions that I use or I recommend on a daily basis in my consultations. There's redirection onto something different, right? For reinforcement, this can look like Sarah sitting nicely at the table when normally she touches friends or leans in her chair. You can see her look around, getting ready to change her desired behavior. So you swoop in real quick, you reinforce her sitting nicely with a little fidget toy. She stays in her chair sitting. Okay, so you see it when it's about to happen, you redirect onto something else. Then there's sensory input. There's meeting an autonomous need. This one can either be really easy or really complicated. The key is to understand sensory processing disorder and what that can look like in a young child. If they're sensory seeking, an easy positive reinforcement would be to meet that need. If they're sensory avoidant, an easy negative reinforcement would be to remove that stressful stimulus. A really easy sensory reinforcer that can be positive or negative is a brain break, whatever that looks like for your classroom. There's calming methods, allowing regulation before having an expectation of a child. This leans more towards a behavior intervention, but it can be used as a reinforcer as well. Common examples of calming methods include a calm corner, deep breathing exercises and meditation, low lights or soft music, okay? Choices. This essentially makes them feel like they're in control. Oftentimes, a situation can be difficult. Excuse me, a difficult situation can be diffused simply by allowing a child to feel that they have a choice in the matter. Even if you provide them with two choices that are both appropriate, that you're okay with either way, they're still making that choice. Token economies are probably the most common form of positive reinforcement. They break down the reward into smaller pieces so the child feels like they're receiving constant reinforcement. This helps guide them in the direction that you're trying to get them to go. Sticker charts are a great example of a token economy system. I've never met a child who doesn't love a sticker or a sticker chart. Meeting the need. This one goes a little more into behavioral, like behavior analysis and that sort of thing, but meeting the need of the child, that's something that takes a little more intention as it's addressing the function of the behavior. This is both a reinforcer and an intervention technique. This is a foundational school of thought with ABA specifically. It's that the child's behavior comes down to one or more of the four functions of behavior: escape, attention, tangible item, or sensory need, also called autonomous. The theory is that working through the behavior to determine the function or the child's core need is in that moment, and addressing the function rather than the behavior necessarily will yield more effective results in behavior modification. Now, this can be done without doing a formal functional behavior assessment for those not trained in ABA. How do you do this in the classroom, right? If you're an educator and you're just trying to manage the classroom, this can look like simply determining what the child is trying to accomplish with the behavior and offer an appropriate alternative that satisfies that purpose. For example, a child hides under the table every day during a specific transition. This is a classroom rule that you cannot be under the table. So your instinct is to yell, Sarah, get out from under the table. I tell you this every day, right? Looking at this through the function lens, most likely this is either an escape function or a sensory function, and the transition is probably too loud and chaotic. An appropriate alternative would be something like giving the child noise-canceling headphones if it's a noise issue, or allowing them to sit in the calm corner during just this transition time. The noise is reduced, they're removed from the middle of the chaos, and they're not breaking a rule. Everyone wins. Now, this specific example does cross over into a negative punishment as you're trying to stop the hiding, which is the behavior, and you're taking something away, the noise or the chaos. However, in order to continue Sarah's desired behaviors, you can prevent by meeting the need before the target behavior occurs. It's about when you provide the reinforcer. So, what is the purpose of reinforcement in the early childhood classroom? Understanding, engaging, leading, connecting with young children, it all requires motivation. Self-determination theory states that all children have physiological and psychological needs that drives everything they do. When the environment fulfills those needs, the child develops well. When the environment does not provide for those needs, either development will be hindered or they will resort to maladaptive behaviors to fulfill the need. It's important to view effective reinforcers for young children as encouraging desired behaviors, but to also view them through the lens of stages of development as meeting a need. For this reason, I've broken down the stages of development and what reinforcement looks like for each one. So starting with the infants, 6 to 12 months old, the stage of development in Piaget's stages, it's sensorimotor, understanding through the senses. In Erikson's, it's infancy, which is trust versus mistrust. So effective reinforcers through this lens of development is timely response to cries, soothing and nurturing interactions, meet the sensory need, and redirection. These are, in my opinion, the most effective reinforcers for the stage of development that these children are at. For the mobile infants, ages 12 to 24, not quite infants, not quite toddlers. This stage of development, this is Piaget's sensorimotor as well, but more about object permanence. And Erikson's early childhood, which is about autonomy and versus shame and doubt. So effective reinforcers for this stage of development would be simple tokens, stickers, stamps, that kind of thing. Simple verbal praise. Yay! Wow, look at that, you know. Nonverbal praise, high fives, hugs. This age loves to be touched appropriately. They love to be touched. And redirection, of course. You know, these are our little guys that are crawling, they're starting to walk, or they've been walking. Lots and lots of redirection. The toddlers, the 2 to 3 year olds. This is a tough age group, you guys. This is a tough one. Stage of development for Piaget, it's pre-operational. This is language and abstract thought. For Erikson, it's early childhood, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Now, these guys, they love stickers. They love tokens. They love ribbons. They love anything you can give them as a token, as a tangible to reinforce that behavior. It just goes such a long way with these guys. Intermediate verbal praise, such as I love that, and then be specific. Great work on fill in the blank, be very specific. And it's always best to praise the work and not them necessarily, because you don't want to attach that confidence with an ability or a skill or an accomplishment, because that can cause issues in the long run. So you want to praise the work, praise what they did, if that makes sense. And then given choices and control. This is a really big one for this age because it's all about me. They're in their world, it's their world, it's them, me, I want this, no, my way kind of thing, right? So giving choices and control, that's going to go a long way for this age. Preschool, 3 to 4 years old. I love this age group. This is probably my favorite age group. These guys are so much fun. They're in the pre-operational for Piaget, which is symbolic play. And with Erikson, they're in the play age. So it's initiative versus guilt. So for this stage of development, some effective reinforcers would be complex and symbolic tokens, treasure box, right? And that also gives them that choice as well. But something like a treasure box where it's a little more complicated, maybe they have to earn 5 stickers now, and 5 stickers gets them the treasure box. Same with the verbal praise, a little more complex. I'm so proud of the choice you made. And then be specific in that choice. I'm so proud of you for choosing this over this. Great work. And then giving them the choices and the control. The treasure box was just one example, but giving them the choice. Would you like to sit in this spot in the carpet or on this spot on the carpet? They're still sitting on the carpet, but they get to choose the spot. Then there's our pre-K, our 4 and 5-year-olds. In this stage, for Piaget, they're in pre-operational. These are abstract concepts. For Erikson, this is the play age and it's initiative versus guilt. Some reinforcers that are effective for this age group are earned jobs. Jobs are huge for this age. Man, when they get to have meaningful play and meaningful work like that, it just does something for them. And you see it. You see it in their behaviors, you see it in their choices and their actions. Removal of non-preferred activity. This is the I want it my way times 10 age group. There's a lot of autonomy being built here. So removal of that non-preferred activity is huge. And then more of that complex verbal praise. And so I hope that kind of helps you understand the differences of the age groups and looking at it from a lens of the stage of development versus just what is this child doing? I tell them every day. The behavior isn't changing. Well, look at their age, look at their stage of development. Look at try to find that function of the behavior, right? I love this quote. This is probably one of my all-time favorite quotes from Bonnie Harris. Children don't know how to ask for what they don't know they need. Their asking comes in the form of behavior. Their behavior is asking you for something. It's expressing a need. It's all they know how to do. We say this about infants when they're itty bitty babies, and they cry, and someone complains about a baby crying. You're like, well, this is their communication, right? This is all they know. They don't know how to communicate their needs. So, same kind of thing with the behavior as the kids get older and grow. And that is what I have for you guys. I really hope that that you took something away from this and gives you a little bit of a different perspective on how to view the behavior and how to apply reinforcers in the classroom. Thank you.
Kayla, what an exceptional presentation. I hope everyone will choose another one and have a great day.